My friends, good day. That's when you realize that faith in aviation isn't what it used to be. In reality, faith in aviation never really existed. I'm like sailors, I like to make speeches. So, today we're going to talk about a terrifying incident that happened this Saturday on board an Air France Airbus A320. What happened is not an accident, nor is it an incident. In reality, the reason we're talking about it is simply because it's something that raised a lot of questions. There are many articles and much sensationalism. So I'm here, so to speak, to set the record straight and try to get a better understanding of what happened. So we have a plane that took off from Orly at the end of the day. It was dark, around 6 p.m. Basically, it's dark at that time of year. And actually, it took off to go to Ajaccio in Corsica about half an hour after takeoff. It's an Airbus A320 half an hour after takeoff while it's at its cruising altitude. People are going to see extraordinary things they've never seen in their lives. In fact, as they describe it in some media, there was fire on the wing. Actually, it wasn't fire on the wing, it was fire coming out of the engine. At night, there are many flashes, and it's hard to know in good faith if they're from the engine, wing, or something else. So what people felt was the plane dropping, and that feeling is completely valid, so the plane dropping. They feel like they're falling with very loud noises and vibrations. And they feel like it lasted a very long time, that this situation went on for a long while. Today, I'll explain what happens in these situations and why it lasted so long. So, first, there was what we call a reactor pump. The reactor is an extremely complex system with sets of compressors and sets of turbines. There's a full authority digital engine control that controls all of that. It's a computerized system that manages the mixture. If you want, how much fuel needs to be sent compared to the amount of air and according to the required speed. And the full authority digital engine control generally does a very good job of keeping the whole system stable, except that it can happen sometimes. So in this specific case, they couldn't have hit a bird because they're at cruising altitude. But sometimes it can happen that, for example, a blade breaks off or a part of the air intake lining comes loose and ends up in the compressor, or any other malfunction you can imagine, which will probably be discovered later. And actually, what happens is that the full authority digital engine control can no longer control the engine. It can't stabilize it anymore. So what will happen is this: we're going to have in the engine, it's very simple, air comes in, which is the oxidizer, and we have jet A1, which is the fuel. And in reality, we're going to end up with a situation where, since the engine is unstable, since the compressor has stalled, well, what's going to happen is that there's not enough air coming in. So if we now compare the air-fuel ratio, if we don't have enough air, we have too much fuel. And actually, that fuel won't be able to burn completely because normally it burns in combustion chambers. We never see the flames, though they're always present. In reality, the flame we see during an engine pumping isn't just visible now, it's actually there all the time. From the moment the engines are started until they're turned off, there's always a flame inside, huge flames inside, except now they're going to come out. Why? Because that unburned fuel is going to reach the outside, and then of course it's going to catch fire, so it leaves a huge trail. Before coming here, I spoke to a friend who pilots this kind of machine. He once had a compressor stall. It happened during takeoff. Well, the flame was longer than the plane. It was the air traffic controller who told him afterward. You could see that the flame extended beyond the length of the plane. So it can create impressive flames. So people who fear these flames aren't overreacting or exaggerating. They're really scary, even if they're not dangerous. These aren't flames on the plane, but outside of it, it's just fuel burning, leaving a streak behind. So now the plane is falling. Yes, it's going to fall, but actually it's not a fall, it's a descent. Because quite simply, once the plane loses an engine, it's at cruising altitude. So it's at cruising altitude. It's not flying much farther than what Airbus calls the rec max, so it's close to the maximum possible. But what happens if it loses an engine? Its propulsion ceiling, well, it's much lower than where it is, so the plane ends up above its propulsion ceiling. What will happen? It will start to descend to go to a lower altitude. So the descent is completely valid. the vibration is valid. Why? Because these jet engines, what they're going to do is, look, if you have a plane like this, let's imagine it takes off, it loses an engine, so what will happen? There will be asymmetry, so the engine is lost at that point, creating a sense of departure. On the side, the pilot corrects with the rudder. You can feel the correction. Your face moves to the side. These lateral accelerations are among the most unpleasant sensations we can experience. But the advantage with a clear engine failure is that it stops pretty quickly, this whole thing. Afterward, the plane flies asymmetrically but remains stable, and you don't notice vibrations or lateral acceleration. The problem with an engine that's surging is that at times you have the engine delivering its nominal thrust, and the next moment it gives almost no thrust at all. So actually, it's not like a failed engine. It's not an asymmetric thrust that stays asymmetric. No, it's that you have asymmetric thrust, and then it comes back, so you try to correct it, and then it comes back again. You see what I mean? It can happen, though I'm exaggerating a bit. The movement is that it's going to create lateral departures because it goes off to one side. Even if the pilot corrects, by the time he corrects, the engine comes back, and so his correction will no longer be useful. Then it's going to throw the meat to the side, and then after that, the engine slows down. Well, it's not that it slows down, it will stop producing thrust. We come back and so on, creating a lot of instability. Why don't the pilots communicate with the passengers right away? That's because the pilots stay calm in their cockpit, and suddenly there's this noise that starts, the plane becomes unstable. They will quickly take over the controls, deactivate autopilot, and fly the aircraft themselves. What's the priority in those situations? The priority in those situations is aviate, which means flying the plane. Really, that's the priority, flying the plane. Even if it means focusing on only the most important instruments. Maintain the plane's attitude, avoid flipping upside down, although that's not possible with an Airbus, but you get the idea, so keep control of the plane above all, then navigate. Here, navigate means knowing your destination and controlling your path both horizontally and vertically. Communicate with the control tower. So here, what the pilots had to do once they took control of their plane, they probably communicated with the control tower to request vectors to explain what's happening. We lost an engine, etc. We want to go, so give us an airport. Lyon, for example. What's the weather like there? That's another important question. So there is communication, but communication with the passengers is not part of that. You see what I mean? If I look at it in a limited way, communication with the passengers, even though it's important, is a lower priority than managing the plane, navigating, communicating with air traffic control. You see, it's not the same thing at all. Why the story? Why what the passengers described lasted a long time? Well, I'll tell you. I talked to several Airbus A320 pilots before coming to you, and here's the story. It's that when you look inside airliners, whether they're Airbus or Boeing, you have two types of checklists. You have checklists that are written down, either on paper or on an electronic system or something else. And you have the checklists that we learn by heart, what we call memory items. So memory items are checklists for the most urgent situations where we expect an immediate reaction. And there's no time to go look for them in a few days, it's right away. Action must be taken. For example, if a pilot takes off and suddenly loses an engine. The actions that will follow, these are memory items, things he has to do right away and remember now. Here's the other problem. Airbus removed engine surge from the memory items. That means that before, previously on Airbus, there were memory items that included engine surge and reduction. That means if the pilots experience an engine surge during takeoff or cruise, they will act from memory. We take control of the failed engine, we make sure it's the right one, and we're in the process of identifying all that. Then bam, we reduce the malfunction from memory even before looking at a document or anything else. This was removed by Airbus. That means the checklist is no longer recalled from memory, but is now in the Quick Reference Handbook. Quick Reference Handbook, that means the Quick Reference Book if you want, or on the cams. If it's been identified by a system, it shows up and then you have to follow that. So it can increase the reaction time. That means instead of the pilots reacting instantly, taking 5 or 10 seconds to stop this problem, well, this problem can last 30 seconds, 45 seconds, or even a minute. And from the perspective of the passengers who are panicked and with whom there is no communication because they are not a priority in the communication. Well, at that moment, it's true that it can create panic situations, it can create situations of fear. Some people said that they wrote their farewell message, they thought their last hour had come, they felt their legs were paralyzed. That's how it manifested. See, that's normal, that's well known. A lawyer said she wanted to complain about Air France. Personally, I'm not inclined to file complaints against pilots who still manage to get me on the ground, because if I'm on the ground, it means I'm in one piece. That means I can presumptively say they did their job, and that's the point. Even if it's true that we might have wished for a bit more information, but again, it's not always simple. Why did Airbus remove this story about the memory item? They probably considered that it wasn't something important, that it wasn't a frequent enough failure to insist too much on it. About failures, they're repeated in the simulator. In a flight simulator with instructors, these failures are repeated until it becomes second nature. What is also repeated is going to look in the book, in what we call the Quick Reference Handbook, or following the instructions from the Electronic Centralized Aircraft Monitor, which is an electronic checklist that appears in front of the pilots in certain situations and allows them to act quickly and in an organized manner. Pilots can't act on their own, even if they know what to do. They are required to refer to the checklist in the simulator. That's what they must do. We also fly, since an engine malfunction leads to an investigation. We want to know how they acted, what their actions were, all of that. The pilot, who will take a minute and follow the Quick Reference Handbook, waits calmly. Get me the page, okay? Is this the correct page, even if it prolongs the ordeal for the frightened passengers? Well, he's behaving as expected. If we meet a virtuoso who says, here it is, that's it, go ahead, snap, bam, I cut it, etc., it could backfire on him later, since people will just say, okay, it's true that you stopped the breakdown quickly and all, but that's not how you were supposed to act. You see, that's it. That's the worry. You see what I mean? In the simulator, there are no passengers, which means that in the simulators, they can simulate passengers. Say, well, there you go. Let's imagine we have passengers. At some point, you take control and communicate with the passengers. Yes, it can be done. That's not the issue. But the thing is, in the simulator, since there are no passengers, well, communication with the passengers is going to play a role. Let's say it's a bit less important if you want. So, once the failure or emergency is encountered in flight, well, you see that it's also less important to communicate with the passengers. Eventually we do it. But in reality, we see the panic it creates when this communication isn't done in time. I wanted to show a little drawing, a chart that comes from financial sciences. It doesn't really come from aviation, but it's valid everywhere. It's a chart that shows you how people perceive risk, real risk, and perceived risk. So there are a lot of marketing, finance, and insurance techniques that are based on this chart. People have made millions with it, and people have lost millions with it too. So I'm just showing you so we're on the same page. So here the chart I've drawn is the actual risk. So horizontally, I have the actual risk that goes from 1 or from 0 to 1 or from 0 to 100. Let's agree on that. And the perceived risk, which ranges from 0 to 100. The risks, we can write them like that, or the probabilities if you want. These are probabilities. We can write them from 0 to 1 or from 0 to 100. You just have to multiply everything by 100. Okay, so what we know about people from psychological studies that have been done, it's that for low risks, when we're dealing with low risks, for example, risks up to 10, 15, whatever, low risks. So far, for example, people tend to approximate them by putting 0. It means anything that has little chance of happening. Well, mentally, we'll put 0. So there's something else. The risks have a fairly high chance of happening, for example, 80 or 75. People tend to consider them as certainties. So if you want, here they will. Let's say from there, we're going to get here. Literally, we're going to go to 100, all that. We're going to declare that here. It's practically guaranteed. This area, all this area, we're going to go to 100. It's as if our brain isn't able to have many categories of risks, that it needs something simple, simplified blocks of risks. So for everything that's in between, we tend to consider it according to an average value, which is generally higher than the actual value. All right, so if I looked at these risks in the minds of most humans, they're divided into three main parts. Low risks, which are considered as zero, which are underestimated. So here, we're in an area of risk underestimation. There's a systematic underestimation of risk. From there, as soon as we get here from this level, we have here a middle zone of risk overestimation. And here, from this point on, we're in a zone where we're not even talking about risk anymore. We're literally talking about a certainty. So you see, we have these three zones here. This is just one graph. There are others that we combine with it. For example, it can be like those people who arrive at a car rental. They want to rent a car and they're told, you know, if the car gets damaged, if you crash it, we're going to charge you a deductible of 2,000 euros. On the other hand, we have insurance. It's 20 euros per day to cover the 2,000 euros. People say, I'm taking the car for 3 days, so I'll sign up for this insurance. They're actually making more money on the car rental, because if you look at insuring 2,000 euros for 20 euros a day, with 20 euros a day, if you multiply that over a year, you see how much that adds up to. You could insure the King of England's castle against fire for a year. And here, you're only insuring 2,000 euros with that. So you see the gap in perception of risk and probability. All right, so people, if you will, when they're on a plane, if we take people who are afraid, who already instinctively, who naturally are not in their element, they will, for example, find themselves here. You see, they will find themselves in an area, in an overestimated risk zone. They're there. They already naturally overestimate the real risk. So then, if ever there's a bit of turbulence, a noise, an explosion, an open flame, if they see something strange or sometimes a go around, well, what's going to happen? They're going to go from here to here. Okay, they're going to go from here to here. And then what happens is that when they arrive at the airport, when they survive their ordeal and feel like they've escaped death, you see, because at that point, they're in what they perceive as the certain death zone. Well, what happens? They're going to give you a bad reputation. You know, they're going to talk about it afterwards. Well, social media, journalists, it fades away, the psychologist, all that. Okay, so that's why it's absolutely essential to communicate with people. All right, communication with people is essential. And then maybe also try to make sure that procedures don't only take problems into account. How can I refer to both operational and human considerations, not just operational aspects? Okay, a compressor stall, we don't know of any plane that crashed because of a compressor stall, that's true, but a compressor stall at night on a plane. Some guys look for the quick reference handbook, especially when the plane is shaking and vibrating a lot. Because here, I told you like this, it's shaking a lot, really, it's vibrating. And you have trouble reading the screen in front of you, all that, you're going to waste time, okay? Your plane will end up landing. The stock price dropped by 10. So maybe that's it too. It's something that will need to be considered. Because when your brand is all over the news with I almost died, etc., and then considerations like that, right? All right, it's true that we wonder, is it a memory item? To say good pumping, reactor reduction wouldn't have been better. That's all. It's just an idea, an opinion. So my friends, thank you for watching this video up to this point. For those who are interested, there are other videos in what's called the Cockpit Club. You can subscribe. There is a paid subscription on this YouTube channel, and there is also a paid subscription for those who want it on Patreon as well. Both allow you to access these videos, which are private, and also to support the existence of this channel. Because you can imagine that when you run a channel like this, you're not going to see an advertising campaign calling you to say hello. we'd like to feature or replace a product on your channel. Like traveling with something like that, you're sure to arrive safely. You see, it's not possible. That will never happen. Thank you, my friends, for watching this video to the end. In my last talk about Airbus, I was smiling and cheerful, but some people criticized me. There was an Airbus incident, and honestly, I was cheerful. And actually, I'd just like to tell you something. You know, when you run a channel like this, there are videos, for example, where there are 300 deaths. You can't really be in a good mood. You're not allowed to. You just have to be serious, okay? I act only out of respect for the victims, even though I actually see all accidents as having no victims. Since I focus on the technical side, I don't really consider the human suffering aspect. It's something I set aside. Not because I don't care, as one might imagine. It's simply what I've seen up close. All right, Jay supported families of accident victims for many years. I was there and witnessed this suffering and distress firsthand. If I considered every accident, this channel wouldn't exist. It simply wouldn't be here. I have to, in a way, focus on the technical side. But sometimes when I have a story like today's or the last time where there were 0 deaths, there's fear, there's worry, there's broken equipment. Well, there you go. I let myself go a little bit, you know. I'm just glad that there were no deaths and that we can make a video in a joyful and good mood. That's all. It's as simple as that. Thank you anyway to everyone who supports this channel. And then I'll see you in the next video. See you very soon.